Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with Chap Ambrose. Chap lives in Bastrop, Texas, which is the home of the Boring Company factory, where Boring Company is doing most of its work in developing tunnel boring machines. And Chap lives nearby and has been critical of some of the things Boring Company has done locally. So I wanted to talk with Chap about his objections to Boring Company, his view of Boring Company on the whole, its local versus global impact. And then before we dive into all that, Chap, would you please tell the people watching a little bit more about yourself? You live in Bastrop, Texas. First of all, tell people, where is Bastrop, Texas?
Yeah, so we're about if you land in the Austin airport, you can go kind of 10 minutes into town, or if you go 20 minutes the other direction, you'd be in Bastrop, and we're kind of on the way to Houston. So yeah, it's idyllic little small town, mostly cow pastures. And we've lived here for about 10 years. I'm a software developer. I work from home. Um, and yeah, 2 years ago, the Boring Company bought my neighbor's property, and we share a county road. And kind of that story has unfolded after the last couple of years, and yeah, starting to be more active in some criticism.
Is it only 2 years?
Yeah, I think it was May 2021 was when they started construction, moving stuff out here.
Software developer, do you have any career highlights, something you've done that you're really excited about, or something you're working on now that you're excited about?
You know, I love the job I have now. I work on internal teams at a big software company, and I have a great little team of really talented people, but not really ever done anything that you'd probably know of, mostly internal tooling stuff these days.
For those who aren't familiar with the Boring Company is a startup that was created by Elon Musk along with Steve Davis, who was an engineer for SpaceX. And it is trying to, or I would say succeeding in rapidly advancing the technology of tunneling. And there is a tunnel system in Las Vegas now, which is criticized by people who don't know much about it. I've been in the tunnels in Las Vegas, to basically create a form of transit that gets us, in Elon's words, to eliminate soul-crushing traffic, that you're stuck in traffic.
Solve traffic.
To solve the traffic problem. And the idea is that when you're building roads, you can only build them on the surface, and maybe you can build a bridge here or there. But when you do tunnels, you can go multiple layers down. You can do tunnels in places that you can't do roads. And because of the Boring Company's improvements, they're actually able to make tunnels on a dollars per mile basis that may be significantly less than building roads on the surface of the planet, when you consider all the costs of building roads. And ultimately, I see that as a game changer for humanity, and we'll talk about that later. But locally, they have a property on is it Route 7 County Route 712? Do I have the number right?
Highway 71, and then you get to Farm to Market 1209 is where they have yeah.
There's the Boring Company property on, I think, the west side of the road, and now SpaceX has a property on the east side of the road.
Flipped, but yes, they're across the road. Boring on east.
Boring's east, SpaceX is west, and SpaceX's property actually runs up toward the Colorado River.
Yep. They've got the riverfront there.
And they're on the east side of the Colorado River, which of course winds all over the place. And they're probably like the edge of the SpaceX property at the Colorado River is probably maybe 10 miles from Tesla's Giga Texas factory, as the crow flies.
I think it's 14 or 15. I measured it the other day.
You live somewhere close to the Boring Company property. Are you a neighboring next door property? How close are you to the Boring Company property?
We're adjacent, but the county road is between us.
You've been a critic of what the Boring Company is doing locally, not globally, but just locally in Bastrop. Could you tell the people what are your major criticisms of what the Boring Company is doing?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, it's environmental violations. And Texas is pretty lax on development rules and those kinds of things, but we do have laws on water and traffic and air. And so what I've been engaged in is just understanding what those laws are, how exceptions are made, and really uncovering that a pattern of this company kind of ignoring those. And I thought of today, it's kind of first principles permitting. So it's like they just go ahead and do it, and then if somebody says they need a permit, then they Well, actually, they fight back on getting a permit. And so there's several examples of that with various local and state agencies, but that's been a real frustration because we live here, we share the groundwater and yeah, share the traffic issues. So
Stepping away from the boring company for a second, is what you're describing, do you think that's unusual in Texas in general, that a property developer or a business starts up and sometimes they don't get their permits correctly and they fight whether they have to get them? Or is that like, do you think boring company is unusual compared to other, startup companies, large companies, et cetera? I don't have the impression of Texas being filled with rule followers.
well, it's a great question. To be honest, I don't know what the average, uh, number of violations is. This is really the most closely I've ever followed any kind of development and have requested public documents. And I think the thing that's maybe unusual is kind of I don't want to call anybody names, but like the arrogance that we see. And so and one of the things that really struck me, kind of this all kicked off, is they were looking for an exception to build their first warehouse out here. And instead of having a wastewater plan, they wanted to just start building without that done yet. And so I had heard about that locally, and I'd also heard rumors of existing wastewater issues, like they had already been notified by the county of ongoing issues. So to me, it was like, why would we give them an exception when they're already breaking the rules? And kind of, so that was sort of the initial push for me to get involved and to see. And yeah, I can talk more about that if you want, but I think it's with them, it's with TxDOT. They're sort of like explaining why basic driveway safety spacing doesn't apply to them, for like a year going back and forth with TxDOT if you look at the emails. So to me, it seems blatant, but I don't know on a severity scale. I couldn't tell you because this is kind of all I know.
Okay, I mean, I think that my general sense, and by the way, I went to college. I went to Rice University in Houston. I visited
Nice.
Austin a few times. I may have accidentally parked on your property. I'm not sure. I've been, there's the road right next to where the boring company first started, and there was an initial gate that was on like a little side road right next to the property. I parked there once. I've parked on the sides of both sides of the county highway to look at the SpaceX property and the boring company property. I think I'm one of the few non-employees who actually walked on the boring company property because there was a sign that said, "Visitors, please check in at the office." And
Yep.
apparently it was intended for people who were planned ahead to visit. They
We
weren't
were invited.
they weren't expecting fans to visit. So I walked up to the office and I started talking. I had a great conversation with them, and they're like, "Yeah, we can't show you the property." And then the next time I came, there was a fence, like it was gated off, and you needed prior approval to get on the property. But I had, walked the land a little bit, walked the area around it a bit. I guess I'm going to ask you for a little bit more depth there. You said there was this issue with wastewater. Um, where does that stand now in terms of what are they doing to deal with wastewater? And by the way, we can include. I don't know what your position is on the SpaceX property. Do you have the same concerns with the SpaceX property that you have with the boring company property?
Yeah, and yes, I have the same concerns. Sometimes people like to group them, sometimes separate them, and I'm happy to do either. But the current status of the wastewater is they have applied for a permit to build their own private treatment plant on the property, and that's with the state. And we had a public meeting back in March about that, and we're still waiting the TCEQ comments, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So I think we're about halfway through this process from what I've been told. But currently they have a smaller permit with just the county to discharge. And SpaceX is also planning to either tie into that facility, is what they said at the public meeting. That said, the city of Bastrop is opposing this permit, and they are in the process of running a utility out here, the sewer system. We're outside city limits, but inside the extraterrestrial. No, that's not. I forget the ETJ. So, kind of as the city is expanding, they're expanding influence and services out here. So that's kind of the current status of that.
And does your property have city water and sewer? Or are you on wells and what is your sewage treatment like for your home?
Yeah, it's a septic system. It's the original septic system was built at the house, and we are on well. And up until recently, there was no services, so I would say all the private homes here are the same,
Do
but
you,
the future will be different.
there's a development called the Colony that's at the sort of on 71 and 1209. So maybe that's 2 or 3 miles from your property. Is the Colony
Exactly.
also on well water, or are they on like city water and sewer? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure there's a private utility called Aqua. I don't know 100%. It gets a little bit complicated, but there's like municipal districts, MUDs they call them here. And so I know the Colony is sort of on its own quasi utility, but I don't know actually the providers, and I don't know what their waste situation is either.
And I think there's a proposal to build another development, another housing development of 100 or so homes somewhere close to the Boring Company property. What's the status of that?
Yeah, we haven't heard anything new. So there are several housing developments happening in the area, but the Boring Company itself has purchased over 600 acres. I'm not sure the current total. And on one slice of that, they submitted a plan with the county to build yeah, 100 homes.
That's so far not gone forward, is what you're telling me.
Right. No, no, they haven't moved any dirt there, and I don't know the status of it.
And isn't that like I guess north of the Boring Company property?
Exactly.
When you describe all these issues, you're on well water, some of your neighbors on well water. Have you or any of your neighbors detected any problems with your water quality?
I don't think anyone has detected contamination in the domestic and the house well. One of my neighbors is a farmer, and they recently built a pond to capture stormwater. And so I know with these, a lot of the issues that Boeing has had is related to stormwater controls and the effect that has on his trees. So I was just talking to him today, but I don't know actually if he's done testing on it. But that is certainly a concern as well.
I think you and I both understand the distinction between sewage treatment and stormwater. I think a lot of people might not understand. A really simple example: stormwater is like rain falls, where does the water go? And if you put a lot of pavement and concrete down, you change how the water flows. If you have a big grassy field, then the grassy field absorbs a lot of water. If you pave it, then that water that used to be absorbed by the grassy field has to go somewhere, forest, whatever. So when there's a lot of development somewhere, you have to address how the stormwater is going to flow. So I think you said one of the neighbors he put a pond in because of stormwater runoff from the Boring Company property or for other reasons.
So this was previously, I think a few years ago, he put this in before Boring Company. What water is just a concern here in general, and we have had some locals' wells run dry, but that's unfortunately not uncommon throughout this summer. But he put in a pond as an extra assurance because, his business relies on having a source of water, so he wanted to back up. And so that was in place before, and now the concern is, yeah, because they're not following the guidelines that can be an issue.
Can you describe what permitting process he had to go through to create a stormwater pond?
That's a great question. Um, I really don't know. I've never looked into that. I do happen to know you get over a certain size, if you build a pond too big on your property, the state technically owns it. There's like a number of gallons. We could look it up. But you can only have things below that. And and I checked, and he was good on that. He's not anywhere close. But I'm not sure what is required from. Yeah, maybe it would be the county, but I'm not sure. I'll ask him next time I talk to him.
I mean, one of my concerns is, you're describing concerns about the Boring Company, and there's other people who have land in the area, and you have a septic system on your property that has potential to affect groundwater, and your neighbor's a farmer. He's probably using chemicals on his crops, and he's diverting stormwater for his own purposes. Is it fair that my gut would be that a different standard is applied to not just the Boring Company in your neighborhood, but generally speaking, when somebody wants to build a business, they get a different level of scrutiny than farmers and homeowners get? Do you see a concern there, or you're not too worried about that?
Well, I would say the laws are the same. There's no special exception that I'm aware of for those. And from what I've seen, it's really the scrutiny is based on impact. And so as you increase in scale, there are more requirements, and and as potential impact becomes greater, that increases. So in that case, maybe you're right that if you're building an industrial complex, you're going to get more scrutiny than a farm. Oh, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. So sorry, I got my screen just flipped back. So I think, yeah, so like I said, I think you're right in some ways. Like, yeah, an industrial complex of any kind is going to have more scrutiny than I think that the smaller impact of a residential house.
Have you looked into whether, for example, my impression, so I was on a town board in upstate New York, which is not like New York City. It's a little bit more like the Austin area. Albany is the capital of New York State, like Austin is the capital of Texas.
Sure.
And I was on like a town board, a bigger town than Bastrop in population. And one of the things I learned was that farms get different treatment from everybody else. That agriculture, farmers have had a huge special interest, and I don't know what it's like in Texas. I know what it's like in New York. They get taxed differently. Their property taxes are lower than other people. And zoning regulations are different for farms than they are for other people. So have you looked into, your neighbors who are farmers and what they're doing to the groundwater and what they're doing to the stormwater and how that might be affecting your community?
Yeah, definitely. And we talk about, I think one of the fun things about this is becoming more kind of involved and knowing my neighbors. When you live rurally and nobody's around for a quarter mile, it's really easy to go years without seeing folks. So this has really brought us together, and talking to him. Yeah, I think you can see what he's doing, why he's doing it. And yeah, I really don't have any concerns about the things that he's doing.
I'm not just referring to him, but I'm saying farmers in general, their regulations might be different than a business, and they might have more loose regulations because of the special interests power that farmers have had over many years. And I don't, like I said, I don't know specifically about Texas. Like when you say the rules are the same for everybody, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think farmers typically have more lax rules than other people.
You'd have to show me. I think the rules that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality enforce, most of them come from the EPA and the Clean Water Act. And there may be provisions in there for farms, but I'm not aware of them. I will say I do know tax exemptions. Ag exemption is definitely a thing, and if you run cattle or have cows, or you can do wildlife exemptions as well. Beekeeping, I'm actually looking into. So those things definitely exist, but from a stormwater pollutant aspect, I'm not aware of any.
Well, beekeeping is like really good for the environment, isn't it? You're actually helping the environment when you do that. So one of the things that's going on is they proposed this sewage treatment plant, which I think is like 3 units of some kind of standard sewage treatment device, and then they were going to dump the runoff, dump the treated sewage water into the Colorado River. Am I getting that roughly correct?
Yes, there's a spray field involved as well. That's another discharge of the treated effluent, they call it, on the spray field. But part of that permit, yes, was overflow into the river. Yeah.
When I heard criticism of that, and I don't know what's correct. Okay, when I heard criticism of that, I also heard a response, which is that the treated water would actually be cleaner than the water that's already in the river. I don't know whether that's true or not. Can you comment on that?
I hear that a lot. I've never seen anybody back it up with facts, I guess is what I would say. Um, the main concern with the kind of the private plant is that, number one, it doesn't follow Texas Water Code, which their goal is to regionalize processing and bring all the water to a bigger area. And one of the big reasons for that is bigger plants simply clean better. And this is something I've learned in this process. And so that's why the city is really pushing to handle the waste and to handle it that way. And Boring Company has actually said itself during the meeting that is the ultimate goal. It's that they're only doing this package plant temporarily, until that pipe is run from the town.
Okay. Are there any other concerns? Because we've talked about a little bit with what the Boring Company is doing, what SpaceX is doing. I think you mentioned traffic. I was on that road. And I saw a lot of truck traffic that had nothing to do with SpaceX or Boring Company. It seems like there's a lot of traffic on that road already. Um, and I sort of had the impression that Texas is kind of like there isn't really a whole lot of zoning, there isn't really a whole lot of regulations compared to a lot of other places. Is there something that they're doing that's bad for traffic that's distinct from all the other traffic that I was seeing? And I'm talking like, tractor trailers fully loaded going like 80 miles an hour down 1209. That's at least it seemed like that. I think sometimes I was following them and they're going like 75, 80 miles an hour. They're Texans drive fast. So, what are Boring Company and SpaceX doing related to traffic that's a particular problem?
Yeah, there's a Bloomberg article if you type in Elon driveway Bastrop. But essentially they built their driveway where TxDOT told them not to, the Department of Transportation, and it's too close to the county road that I live on. They didn't make it wide enough for the size of trucks they have,
This is
and
SpaceX,
they didn't.
Boring Company, or both?
This is Boring Company.
Okay.
And they didn't accommodate the stormwater plan for the flooding that we have here on occasion. So they submitted a permit. 2 days later, TxDOT gave them listed these issues. And then Boring Company sort of started to explain why they should be given exceptions. TxDOT came to find out they had already built that driveway before they had the permit, and kind of spent, there's a year of emails literally about from Boring Company explaining why it doesn't, why the guidelines don't apply. Eventually, TxDOT threatened to barricade it. They gave them like a 1 day notice. They were going to barricade it unless they submitted a plan. And so that went through. They got a temporary exception for it. And they also worked. The other thing that was delaying was the expansion of that road. So part of that discussion was how they were going to add turn lanes. That has been done. TxDOT completed that recently, and so we have those turn lanes. It's much better than it is now from a traffic perspective. The driveway is still there. It'll be interesting to see if they can get a permanent exception or if they're going to have to move that. But yeah,
Let me just ask you, there's a road that's on the side of the property that I think is called Walker Watson Road.
Yeah.
And then 1209 is the main road that runs between the Boring Company property and the SpaceX property. Walker Watson Road is on the Boring Company side. And then the driveway that I know about for the Boring Company property is maybe, I don't know, it's not 100 yards, maybe 50 yards from Walker Watson Road. Where
right.
am I roughly describing this? So which is
Yep.
So the main driveway, it used to be the entrance was off Walker Watson Road. And then they created this other entrance. So which is the entrance that you're saying is improper?
It's the one off 1209. That one where they have the ring, they have the big sign there. And technically
it's too close to what?
Walker Watson.
And Walker Watson is a county road?
That's right.
Isn't Walker Watson like a dirt road that doesn't, I mean, maybe it serves some local, I mean, I don't know what a county road is. It's dirt, isn't it?
Not anymore. No, they paid $30,000 to pave it.
They paved it to their entrance, or they paved it all the way back?
Not all the way, but just along the property that they own.
So Boring Company paved what was a county road, or what was defined as, but it was defined as a county
donated to the county.
I mean, where does that road go? I didn't go all the way back.
It's a dead end. It's a dead end.
Okay. I'm a little fuzzy on the term county road. It seems to me like it's just a dirt road that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, does it get, I mean, maybe it goes to your property. I don't know. Are you on the other side of Walker Watson Road? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, there are 3 or 4 property owners.
Yeah, I think when I think of county road, I'm thinking of a road that goes from point A to point B and serves,
Oh,
this is one of those things with Bastrop being not
mine is a state road.
Well,
sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, Boring Company, Bastrop is what it was sparsely populated before. So, my perception of a county road is like a county highway.
Yeah, and in this case, I mean, the state road is 1209. The state controls that, and the county is responsible for the smaller roads in the county. And so when I say county, I mean Bastrop County Commissioner like deals with the paving of that road, not that it's any kind of highway. And it was dirt up until a year ago.
So what is the rule on how far a driveway has to be from a county road, and how far are they from that rule?
I'm gonna have to look at my emails now. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
I don't need the specific number, but like from a practical standpoint, why does it matter that they're 50 yards from a road that's only serves 3 or 4 homes? And I never saw anybody drive. I was there like a few times. I never saw anybody come in or out of that road. It's not like it's a high volume road. Why is this? I can understand what you're saying. There might be some regulatory issue, but why is this a practical problem that it's that close to Walker Watson Road?
I think it's a matter of the turning traffic, but to be honest, I don't know specifically. I think maybe the violation that's easier to understand is the narrowness of the driveway and the entrance. And that's something I've documented in my videos a lot because of the trucks that they get on a daily basis. You basically have to cross both lanes to turn in, or you had to. And so I think that from a novice perspective, that was easier for me to understand, because you're right. I don't really know why the safety spacing is what it is.
Sorry, you said they added turn lanes. So when I was there before, I haven't looked at it in a while. There's basically one lane going, I guess, north and one lane going south, and there's a shoulder. So you're saying they've expanded the shoulder into a turn lane on both sides, for the SpaceX side and the Boring Company side?
Yes, and we have a center lane now as well for left turns.
Oh, so like would you call that a suicide lane, or am I?
Yeah.
Okay. I hate that. I hate those.
Yeah, but I'm not calling it that. But yeah.
By the way, Tesla's full self-driving software for me in Florida did not like suicide lanes. The last time I hadn't used it in months now, but when I was using FSD and the area where I was at where they had suicide lanes, it did not like, if somebody turned into a suicide lane, it panicked. They're turning into a suicide lane and they're not coming into your lane, it would panic, and it wouldn't go into the suicide lane to make a turn. So I think it may have gotten.
That's the assisted suicide lane when you're doing it that way.
Right. Thank you, assistance. I'm going to use that. Did I miss anything that, it sounds like your major concerns so far are wastewater, stormwater, and traffic.
Yeah.
Are there other concerns that you haven't mentioned yet that
they're doing concrete production, and so I've learned there are some regulations about air quality because of the dust that can come from that. I think at the moment they're such a small scale that they don't apply in their cases. But yeah, air quality is definitely a concern as well, but not something we've seen as much.
I think we probably, and I think they're creating concrete because they're making segments that go inside the tunnels to shore up the tunnel walls. That's, I think, the primary reason they're making concrete. I'm not sure of any others. And I remember when I was there were like stacks of these tunnel segments, concrete segments.
Yep.
They were like all
they're still
over.
making them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they've made some tunnels, like they did a tunnel from the Boring Company property to the SpaceX property. Maybe they did more than one. Were there any concerns about how they did those tunnels? Did they violate any rules with that? Did they cause any problems for the neighbors with those?
They did 2 of those. I have not heard of any issues. I know TxDOT made them measure the road height and to laser check it constantly to see if they were going to have any dip. But as far as I know, I haven't not seen any issues or heard any issues on that.
Okay. And, before we go into some larger issues I wanted to talk about, there's been talk among fans that, SpaceX, Tesla, Boring Company fans, that Boring Company might do a tunnel from Bastrop to the Gigafactory. Have you heard anything about? I don't think there's any permits filed. Have you heard anything about that? Do you think that's likely? And would something like that make life better for people who live in Bastrop and, let's say, work in Austin?
Sure, it sounds good. I have not heard anything but rumors. I've read those rumors and heard them, but I haven't seen anything confirmed. But I mean, traffic is definitely an issue in Austin and around it. So I think creative ideas are great. I just and we could talk more about the more recent violations. Maybe there's things that are a little more spicy. But the main issue I'm looking at is there was an anonymous complaint that I didn't make about them discharging their banker box. They're sort of this is the water that cools the machine, and water circulates when they're actually doing the tunneling, and that can include grease and some other issues. And so they store it in a box and they take it away. So this complaint says that they discharged it onto the property, or they're suspected of. And so to me, that is a lot more significant than what we've talked so far. And I'm really diving into this one. And because of the groundwater issue. And I'll hope to have more news on that. I've been talking to TCQ on that, but
So that's an anonymous complaint and there's no evidence?
no evidence. Yeah, I'm working on that part.
Okay. I mean, somebody said it happened were there details provided beyond, hey, they discharged?
Yeah, there was a date. So I'm working on getting satellite photos.
Was there a date? Was there a location of where the discharge occurred?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna get photos and see, because that, yeah, to me is a lot. But you're right, it's unconfirmed, and this investigation actually, because of the time, they didn't even take a sample, and that's something I'm talking about TCQ as well. I think that's one maybe misconception. I think talking to people is they think the regulatory agencies are super strict or aggressive. From my perspective, they're incredibly helpful and accommodating to these businesses, and they do give them exceptions, and they do give them grace periods to fix things, and they do give them multiple tries before sort of escalating. And so, I was talking to a developer the other day, and I could see he had issues, and I was like, "You need to just call them and tell them what's going on, and they will help you fix these issues." And that's really what they do. Um, and so, some of these investigations, I think, in my opinion, weren't thorough and didn't really answer the concerns that were raised. And but even though these claims find an issue, they had 3 violations within a year, and so they're potentially going to get a fine. It's called enforcement, and so this is the first time we've seen a violation go to enforcement because it's the same issue that's happened repeatedly. And so that's the thing that's maybe harder to talk about, is just the pattern of repeat issues with each agency. And so what we're seeing now is 2 years of them not doing what they're supposed to do. It's not like the first time and they fixed it. Like, they've been warned, they've been have violations, and then 3 times later, now they're potentially going to get a fine. So
Okay, so I wanted to talk about a larger issue, which we talked briefly about the potential for a tunnel from Bastrop to Austin, and we talked about soul crushing traffic. What's your general impression of what the Boring Company is trying to do and how that might matter for the world?
I think the idea of small tunnels that connect, entranceway, you don't have to have a whole station. The idea of the loop sort of network, I think it's really compelling, and especially with a self-driving, I think it's really compelling alternative to other mass transit options. But fundamentally, I wouldn't trust this business to build it.
Okay, well, I want to get away from I understand you're not happy with the Boring Company. I just wanted to get to this because there's this larger issue, and we see the same thing with SpaceX, right? SpaceX is trying to build a rocket to go to Mars, and Tesla is trying to build electric vehicles that will reduce use of fossil fuels and reduce carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere and other pollutants into the atmosphere. And then we see, like in Berlin, the German government or German environmental groups, so-called environmental groups, protesting, litigating, trying to stop Tesla from building a factory that builds more EVs, which would displace more gas cars. SpaceX is trying to build a rocket that will dramatically lower the cost of access to space. And then I don't even think the locals in Boca Chica are really complaining that much, but there's, issues being raised by Fish and Wildlife or whatever, the FAA, and it's like we see these regulatory attempts to regulate, and I feel like there's a failure to balance the local regulation with the larger global attempt to make life better for everyone. Can you comment on how you see that balance playing out, not just with the Boring Company in Bastrop, but not just Elon Musk's companies, but in general? Do you see any concerns with any of that?
Um, it's hard to get out of my own personal experience. I think there are. I actually, the Texas governor just submitted a request to the EPA to lower the gasoline standards in El Paso because of some shortage issues. I didn't even know this was possible. But there is a way to actually lower environmental regulations sort of officially. And so I think if the position is we are doing really good things, but it's going to require a larger impact that isn't within guidelines, there is a process to follow. But I think what you're seeing here, and I have a hunch it's similar in Boca Chica, and I've heard similar things in Germany, is that these these are like compounding issues that are escalating in severity as the impact is increasing. And so, it's not, and they're also really simple things. Stormwater is sort of the most basic, and wastewater, putting in, a septic, that they're not hard, complicated engineering things. You do have to plan. And I think that's where the sort of agile mindset of like, you don't need to start building it till you need it, is causing them problems, because the permitting process can help you, like, here's the right way to do it. Like when they submit a driveway plan, it's like, okay, well, here's the right way to do it this way, and you'd have your permit, it's a one pager. And similarly for stormwater, it's only because, and again, I'm talking from my experience, is like they're not even following the minimum standards of these simple things, and they're talking about having all this impact. So that's where the concern is on the local level. I can see from a larger level, it's not your water, it's not your traffic, it's not your air, and so I can understand that. But fundamentally, like I kind of think this is government's role. When a landowner is stepping beyond and impacting their neighbors, like there has to be a mediation process. And I'm finding success. It's definitely not easy, fast, or simple. But I do think it is more possible than I expected at the beginning.
Okay, let me make my pitch for Boring Company and tell me whether I mean, you're saying you don't see them doing it. Have you been to Las Vegas?
No, let's go.
Well, I've been in the time. I'm living in Japan now, so I'm not going to Vegas anytime soon. I'm going to India next. But I've been in the tunnel system in Las Vegas, and I think I mean, actually, I think people exaggerate it a little bit. It's cars in tunnels, right?
Right.
That's not that exciting from a like riding in it. Okay, it's a tunnel. I'm driving in a tunnel. I've driven in tunnels before. But when I understand the larger potential for what Boring Company is doing to really make life on Earth better for everyone, at a smaller level, let's say a city like Austin, I think is at I-35 or something like can have really bad traffic. And if you add like 4 lanes of tunnels underneath I-35 as an overly simple example, you might really alleviate traffic inside the city of Austin and make life better for people. And if in the long run you take traffic that was on the roads and you put it in tunnels and you do it with electric vehicles instead of gas cars, you're cleaning the air and you're reducing noise pollution and you're reducing traffic accidents and you're eliminating, there's no pedestrians in the tunnels, basically, at least not where the cars are moving fast. In the stations, there's pedestrians, but the cars are going 5 miles an hour. There's a lot of big gain just on a local level. And then I don't know if you've seen me talk about Boring Company before, but I see the potential. Then there's talk about like intercity tunnels. There's even rumors of a Austin to San Antonio tunnel. By the way, I've driven on the roads south of Austin, and I don't have the impression traffic is that bad. Is there a need for tunnels from Austin to San Antonio, or is that just like, hey, we can do it, why not?
I think it's a good question. I'm sure there's traffic, at the worst times. But I think it's more from a mass transit perspective, moving between cities, and less, a private individual tunnel.
Okay, because when I've driven south of Austin, I didn't encounter a lot of traffic. It's not very heavily populated state, I'm not sure about the road quality. I think you guys need to build, well, your number of your miles of road per person is much higher because your population
Oh
density.
yeah.
Like roads in Florida are spectacular. Roads in Texas is like, boy, this road's kind of noisy. In the colony, my Tesla raised the suspension automatically because the colony's roads, which is a new development, right? But the colony's roads, which is a new development, the roads are rough enough that and there's a lot of Teslas driving in the colony because there's a lot of Tesla employees that live there. Like their system actually knows, okay, the roads are rough here. We got to raise the suspension. Model X.
That's the disadvantage of the electric car, right? Is you don't have the rumble of the engine to muffle all that.
Yes. So when I look at the long-term potential for, number one, it's not just like one city, it's like every major city in the world could
Sure.
benefit from a tunnel system. And then I go really big and I say you run a tunnel system from Los Angeles up through the Bering Strait and down through Russia into China. And if you do that right, you could basically replace all trans-Pacific cargo shipping and all trans-Pacific air traffic. And if you keep going, you could run tunnels, let's say along the Arctic Circle over to Northern Europe. I'm not sure you'd go along the Arctic Circle or somewhere in that general vicinity over to Northern Europe. You could run tunnels to India. You could basically connect something like 80% of the world's population with tunnels and eliminate the need to use airplanes and ships. And ships are really bad in terms of pollution in the sea, and airplanes are really bad for pollution in the air. The tunnels would be safer, faster, cheaper, more convenient, a lot of advantages over this. I'm not saying you would eliminate all of it, but you would eliminate a lot of that, and that would be a really big game changer for humanity in a lot of ways. And not just humanity, but the environment, the animals that live in the sea is just another example. Am I crazy for thinking that stuff's possible if we can get regulation out of the way? I mean, and the biggest hurdle, by the way, is for my Bering Strait ideas, you'd have to go through Russia to get to China. And I've heard that there may be some conflict between the US government and the Russian government that may impair that kind of deal. And not to mention, there's some potential conflict between the US government and the Chinese government. And my take on that, by the way, is maybe we could all stop fighting and work together to make life better for everyone. That's a little bit of a, pie in the sky, Warren's a dreamer kind of thing. We could play John Lennon's Imagine right now. But
No, I love it. I think you're right. I think there's definitely potential. And my mind first goes to if you've ever seen these like 3 and 4 decker overpasses in
yeah.
Texas, they just keep going up, and it's like, why are we going up? So I actually absolutely think there's untapped potential in tunnels. To me, I don't see regulation as the issue, but my question first would be why would it be Boring Company and not the dozens of other tunneling businesses that exist and have been doing this for decades?
Well, but I mean, the answer to that is that the Boring Company has figured out. I don't. Have you read their funding round? The release where they're trying to speed up tunneling.
I know what their goals are, and this is something I've had success is like what they say they want to do compared to what they are doing. It's helpful for me to separate because yeah, I totally read those goals, beat the snail, make it cheaper. Based on my experience and reading the docs compared to what they say and what they do, like I will trust that when I see the numbers. And I think it's a lofty goal, but I'm not sure it's I don't think they're there yet.
Well, I'm going to guess you're not an Elon Musk fan, but I think that's something that he's encountered before with, online payments don't make any sense. People don't want to make payments online. And then all of a sudden PayPal's a multi-billion-dollar company. Nobody wants an electric vehicle. And now Tesla's the fastest growing, large car company. The first new car company to succeed in America in 100 years. And frankly, I'm biased, but I think they make the best cars on the road, the safest cars on the road, and so on. SpaceX is launching 75 or 80% of global mass to orbit this year. They are, if you go back, SpaceX started and they blew up a few rockets, and it took a while for them to get it down, and now all of a sudden, they're doing pretty good right now, right? And so when and the guy who runs Boring Company, Steve Davis, is one of the engineers who helped SpaceX succeed in the early days. So, you've got Elon and you've got Steve Davis, two people who built a really successful company when the early days didn't look good, and Boring Company is early days. So with that track record of him building companies that have bold goals, and by the way, I'm wearing the Turn Impossible into Late t-shirt.
Nice.
Which is a shirt that I made that is available on elonbits.com. I don't think Chap is buying any Elon-related merchandise anytime soon. Do you have some Elon?
I was going to wear my Cybertruck shirt because I I
Burnt hair.
absolutely.
I have burnt hair.
Oh,
You
does
can
it
see
smell
it. You
terrible?
can see that the hairs. I haven't opened it. You can see it works. No, I haven't. I actually haven't opened it yet. I
That's
traveled.
cool.
I traveled to Japan. I got rid of almost everything I own, but the two things I brought with me were a piece of the plaid powertrain from Sandy Monroe's teardown and the burnt hair. I think the burnt hair might get sacrificed on my next move. I'm just saying it. It might. I might let it go. I paid a lot of money
How did
for
you
it.
get that much liquid through airport security? I'd be stressed about
Oh, that was
that.
in check bags. That was in check bags.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if it's more than
Um,
3 ounces actually. I'm not sure it's
um,
3 ounces. How many ounces is this? I
well,
actually
here
don't
we
know.
go.
I probably had it in check bags.
Okay.
Oh, you got a Cybertruck?
So,
Very nice.
yeah, and if you go in my post in 2019, 2 months after he announced it, I've got a little CNC machine. I made a little Hot Wheels toy for my daughter.
Do you have an order?
Um,
Yep. Have you ordered one?
I'm on the list. Yeah. I just got a used F-150 though, so we have to figure out the timing. We'll see when it comes, but
How early is your
um,
order?
it's been so long since I looked up. I was like day 3. It took me 3
Oh,
days to get into it. So,
hey, three. You're like a year or two away. Come on.
and that's so close. Like, right? Can't they just deliver it?
Yeah.
Um, but I think, yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I actually think like it's obviously a successful strategy to set lofty goals and to set nearly impossible, seemingly impossible goals. I think, but the contrast is like they're pitching tunnels in Texas now, and so like Kyle was debating between the Boring Company and Southland for this little tunnel, and so while their proposal was also filled with those goals, like that's not the reality of what the work's going to be now and here. And that's why I'm really curious how Vegas is going and doing some research there. And there's a great account there that's been posting progress. But for me, it is like the daily reality of what's happening and less like where are we going to be 10 years from now.
Okay. I mean, but I'm still trying to get at this challenge of like you have these lofty goals, and I think like Tesla's a really good example of this. They're very clearly changing the game in the auto industry from fossil fuels to electric. And I think if you've driven a Tesla, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the markets, we're not going back. They have
Right.
set a path, and SpaceX has very clearly changed the game for space. That if you're not reusable, you're going to be dead. And my impression of Boring Company is that they're already working on Proof Rock 3, I think, when they've already got Proof Rock 2 going. I don't know how fast they're boring tunnels. I don't know, they haven't given a lot of reveal about what their progress is, but they're definitely making progress in Vegas, and they've expanded the Resorts World, and I think they've expanded to at least one other resort, and they're working on the Strip. Do you know how many tunnel boring machines they've built that have actually been shipped out? Or is there anybody like tracking, like, I have a friend who goes to the Megapack factory in Lathrop, California, and like camps outside in his car and counts Megapacks coming out of the factory. Like, there's people who have drones that are flying over, and they've droned the Boring Company property. Joe
Yeah.
Tessler is droning Giga Texas. He occasionally pops over to Boring Company, but it's not like he's droning it constantly. Is anybody keeping track of? Because I think they're trying to make one tunnel boring machine a month. Do you have any?
That's a good question. I've seen the machines out there, but I have not kept track, and I'm not aware of anybody else who's been that closely sort of daily here. Um, I wanted to put a tower with a camera, amazing camera on my house, so I could record. I wouldn't have to fly my drone all the time, and we could know all these things. But my wife won't let me do that for now.
Your wife's in the way. Okay, you got another neighbor. I can tell you that there's an audience for that. If
Yeah.
maybe your farmer neighbor can put up a tower or something. I think there are people who want to see that. I'm not sure that the Boring Company would want you to do that. So that's another question. So with SpaceX and Boca Chica, Texas, the southern tip of Texas, they bought out a lot of property owners, and then I think they may have pursued eminent domain to buy out the ones that they didn't get. Have there been any overtures from SpaceX, Boring Company, anybody else to buy your property or buy any of your neighbors' properties?
Yeah, they're definitely buying neighbors. I tweeted that I wasn't for sale, so maybe that's what's kept them away. But we get offers, but I have not heard one directly from them.
You get offers maybe from others.
Yeah.
Okay. And have the offers been higher than what you paid for the property?
My standard response is like, just mail me your best offer, and I just hang up. So far, it's all been vultures who are, yeah, way down there on like, uh, not even in line with what the tax values are. So.
Oh yeah, man. But I mean, I get those calls for a house I don't even own anymore.
Oh, you do? Well, so then maybe it's everybody.
No, I mean, there's all these like, hey, do you want to sell your house? It's like all these scams out there, and people who are praying. They're. I think if you call 1,000 people, 5 of them might be desperate for cash.
I
And
know it's sad though, because then I got this because that's my response. So I get it. And I'm like, I need to follow up and see what houses these people have bought, who was desperate enough to sell, like see if we can help these people. Because yeah, that they're
but I
it
mean,
sounds like maybe it's Mhm.
you said some neighbors have sold. Did you know those neighbors
Yeah.
before?
Um, I have known some neighbors that have sold. Yeah.
And did you have any conversations with them? Do you know the details of their sale? Did they get significantly over what was market before for their property?
All that is confidential.
It's not recorded in the county records how much somebody paid for the land.
No, it's just like more than $10, I think, is what legally you have to have, or it's something like that in the deeds.
I guess if somebody files a mortgage, you might be able to find the mortgage, but if they pay cash, then you
Right.
don't see it. Okay. And
Exactly.
Boring Company is not a publicly traded company, so their numbers aren't necessarily public. And maybe the neighbors aren't talking about how much they got. And so you have a bunch of neighbors that are on Walker Watson Road. None of them have sold,
Um,
other
Nobody.
than obviously the property that the Boring Company's on, somebody sold to them. But
No, there's been 2 properties on that road that have sold.
and did you know those folks? And have you talked to them? Did they? Can you describe what kind of? I mean, I would think in some sense people are like, hey, this is my chance to sell this and move somewhere else, and I'll take some extra money and move on. There
Yeah,
were
yeah, absolutely.
and there were people in
There's some people are investors. Yeah.
But there are people in Boca Chica who, were offered basically triple the value of their property, and they said no because I think one of them wanted to watch launches, right? But
Yeah.
they need people who are going to clear out when they're told to clear out. They need to own the land because we're launching like a really big bomb here. If it goes
Right.
off, we can't have you here if it goes off. Um, so yeah, I would just I'm a little bit surprised that they're not just like making you an offer you can't not an offer you can't refuse. They're making you a big offer that you're like, all right, that's enough. I'll take it and move on. That I mean,
Yeah, I've thought about it, but I'm not for sale. I don't really think that's a path I plan to pursue.
okay. But like I said, you've got other neighbors who are still there. Are they pretty much entrenched? We don't want to go anywhere.
I think it's a mix. I think, wait and see. It's a lot of family land. Been in the family, so I think those decisions are harder. But I also understand the realities of everybody's situation, and I'm not going to hold against somebody for selling their property.
I want to come back to this general question of there's a company that's trying to make a difference in the world. And then you've got, Elon complains about permitting in California as an example of this. You've got all kinds of local regulation. You've got like homeowners who don't want this development near them. But somebody's actually pursuing something that could be game changing for humanity. How do you balance the local effort to, minimize traffic on my road or, uh, address this particular environmental regulation versus the global goal of reducing pollution and the world. I'm not big on. I don't really spend a lot of time worrying about CO2 emissions. You just bought an F-150, so you're probably not as concerned about CO2 emissions as some other people. But when you see that, I think we can all agree it would be better to have less pollutants in the air. It would be better to have less pollutants in the water. When you see somebody that's trying to do something that could make these game changing, how do you feel about that balance of global benefit versus local environmental regulation, local permitting?
Yeah, to me, I really don't think they're in conflict. And this idea that we have to pick one or the other, I think it's a false dichotomy. I think the regulations we're talking about are simple, and anybody who's planned a big site and had an environmental planner would have taken care of these issues. So I think it would be so easy and cheap, and they would go faster if they followed regulations and worked with the agencies and worked with the neighbors. They already have so much, intrinsic goodwill with what you're saying, saving, addressing these big real problems. But it's just like I said, the unfortunate reality. And I can tell you, this is my county commissioner told me the first words from Steve Davis to him were nobody says no to Elon. And that was right after their proposal was denied in court because we showed up and said, you can't give them an exception when they have violations. It doesn't make sense. And so immediately he is aggressively for the first time in his face. And this is a small town. And that is one issue example of that we've had. And so the sentiment, I think, is unnecessary, and I think it's counterproductive the way they operate. It's disrespectful, and honestly, it's embarrassing.
There's something you said earlier that conflicts with something I think you just said. You think anybody who builds a project would do it better, but it sounds to me like you haven't really invested. When I asked you earlier, are they doing worse than others? I'll give you an example of context is people will criticize Tesla and say, oh, look, they got sued for discrimination. It's like, well, okay, how many times has General Motors been sued for discrimination? How many times has Ford been sued for discrimination? It turns out that every major company at some point gets sued for discrimination. If you employ 100,000 people, at some point, one of your managers is going to do something wrong, right? So, when I asked you before about whether you've investigated whether other companies, whether other companies in other parts of Texas or other places have had similar issues, you said you really hadn't looked at that. So when you say anybody would have done better, my take on that is it sounds like you don't really know. You just know you don't like what you're seeing locally, and maybe you're not. This is that whole point about perspective. Like, and I've been there. Like, I've been local, and I didn't like somebody doing something, next to my house. We're all there. We can all see that. It's like, I don't think it's fair to attribute this is what I'm seeing locally with this is only happens with this company and nobody else has ever done anything like this before. I don't think T. Boone Pickens was known for being polite to everybody, right? There's famous Texas entrepreneurs who push people out of the way when they had to. I think that's sort of like a general thing with successful business people is sometimes they push hard and they rub people the wrong way. So I do you see my point there that without knowing what's happened somewhere else, it may not be fair to attribute that to the boring company and say, well, anybody else would have done better.
Yeah, and I can clarify. I'd say talking to environmental engineers about this project, there are really obvious, simple issues that anybody who hired an engineer would have seen, would have addressed. And again, it's the pattern, the repeat pattern of the same issues. And this is why the regulatory agencies are escalating. It's because they don't fix it. Like, anyone can make a mistake. I agree with you there. And a lot is going on. So I'll give you 2 or 3 chances, but we're up to 14 violations here. And the last ones just came out September 29th. And meanwhile, they're trying to get a new permit for this new discharge. So the impact is increasing, and we haven't seen the care increasing. It's continuing to be reckless. And so that's what's concerning, and that is my perspective. But you're absolutely right. I don't have a lot of perspective on other projects, and I wouldn't be able to compare them. I'm sure there are worse ones. They're not worse. There aren't any worse ones in my view from around me.
It's just sort of like it's easy to dive in. I think the word is hyperbole, and it's not my favorite word, but I think the word is hyperbole that, well, anybody would have done better than that. Well, we don't know what other people have done, and I don't either know what other people have done.
I'm saying an environmental engineer would have designed the property better based on several conversations with engineers. That's what I'm saying. Sorry, I wasn't clear.
No, but I mean, a couple of environmental engineers can say whatever they want. What projects have they built, right? It's when you're trying to build something big, like, honestly, like, I'm a sports fan. I don't watch as much sports as I used to, but like every NBA player pushes every rule to the limit. And the way you win games is by pushing the rules to the limit. And sometimes when you push rules to the limit, sometimes you get called for a foul. And if you said an NBA player who's fouled out of 3 games, shouldn't be allowed to play basketball, well, that's not the way the system works. And I can see where this particular NBA player pushes the rules too far, right? And that I don't think that necessarily, because I see it in my local context. This is a problem. I see these guys doing this. You and I, neither one of us knows how much General Motors has done that. I know, like, so I lived in upstate New York, and General Electric was being sued for dumping PCBs in the Hudson River, right? And my impression is they dumped a lot of PCBs in the Hudson River, right? And there's all kinds of issues with that. So, like, General Electric did some stuff that people didn't like. And I mean, the things I've heard about what GE did on their property is like way, way worse than anything you're describing with what Boring Company is doing. It was an earlier time. The regulatory environment wasn't the same. So I just think there's a hyperbole there that I'm hearing in what you're saying, that like nobody else would have done that. Well, I don't know about nobody. I don't know how much other companies push the rules, other companies go up against the limits, and I don't think you do either. So I don't know. I mean, I think you have legitimate concerns about this is the rule they're supposed to follow, and I want them to follow it. So I just wanted to, be clear with you that that's a concern I see. And when I see you criticizing the Boring Company, is like, it's one thing to say, I don't like that they're doing this. It's another thing to say nobody else would have done that. Do you see my point?
Yeah, I do absolutely, and that's why I think clarifying is like that with a plan, these issues wouldn't have occurred with an environmental design and a plan and following the plan.
But again, lots of other companies may have built something without having a plan.
They haven't done so around me, and so that's why I'm talking about this issue.
Yeah. And then the other question I was going to ask you is, I've had this conversation with somebody before. When I was on my town board, and one of the things that a developer would do if they had this new development is they would actually like engage with the community. They would come out and they would like schedule a meeting saying, here's what we're doing, what concerns do you have? And it sounds to me like maybe Boring Company never had like a local community meeting saying, hey, this is what we're working on. We'd love to get feedback from the neighbors, what you guys think about this, how we can do this in a way that causes less of a burden for the community. I'm guessing they never did anything like that, or have they done anything like that?
So the first year we had a pretty close connection with the director of development, and but the things he told us he didn't happen. And so that was sort of the beginning of like, oh, maybe they're not being totally truthful with what's going on. And so that has caused further, I think further distrust here.
So director of development, do you have a name? I don't know who that is.
He doesn't work there anymore.
Okay. So did they have like a community meeting? Did he just go around and talk to the neighbors individually? How did that happen?
I saw them inside the gate down there moving some porta potties in. So I went and helped them push their porta potties in and talk to them.
Okay. It's not, but that's what I'm saying. It's not like they were setting up because
No.
what I've seen is like somebody will say, hey, now to be fair, I'm talking about a town that had extensive zoning regulations and
Right.
board and zoning board, and they would like schedule a meeting and invite the neighbors and send a notice to everybody who was within 500 yards of the property or something and say, hey, we're having a meeting, we want to talk about the development we're doing, and typically be like a housing or commercial development, like a retail development or something. And the idea is, if you bring the neighbors in and you give them a chance to be heard, right, and you bring everybody in and you listen to them, and you might not make a whole lot of changes compared to what you were going to do, but you at least kiss people's asses and make them feel like you're doing something. And it sounds like they didn't even set up a meeting, right? That you just to meet the guy at the property when you saw him doing something, you had a conversation with him then, right?
Right. Yeah, and they're really not required to. The only time a public input has happened is when they tried to get that exception for the warehouse and on this wastewater permit. Those are also the only like legal open forums. Or other than that, no, there hasn't been any.
Right, and I'm not saying I'm saying like there is a strategy of bring the
neighbors,
engage the neighbors, and I don't know how often it's done everywhere, and maybe it's done less in Texas than it's done in upstate New York. And again, because of the regulatory environment and the zoning environment in New York, it may be more important to do it there. And sort of related to that, have you ever met Steve Davis or Elon?
I haven't seen Elon. I've seen Steve and tried to talk to him, but he just walks away from me when I walk towards him. So,
And is that was the first time that that happened after you had been a publicly critical of the Boring Company?
um, that's a good question. I think so, probably, yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So he may just not want to have that confrontation.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And does anybody else in the
Um,
Boring Company reach out to you and try to communicate with you, or I mean, it seems like you're the leader. I don't know. Are there other property owners who are similarly vocal that would it be fair to call you the leader of the movement criticizing Boring Company for what they're doing?
I'm the mouthpiece. Yeah.
Okay. And the people who aren't happy go to you and say, "Hey, say this," or "Hey, I've discovered that." And there aren't other people who are standing up and taking heat themselves, or are there other people who are going to public meetings and speaking up?
Oh yeah, definitely, public meetings. The public meeting, they booked a room that was half as big as they needed to. They lied to the hotel. They said it was an employee training. The hotel had to scramble to hire more security, bring in a fire marshal. I'll send you this email. This is all in public documents. And only half the people who showed up for that meeting could get in. So there's definitely public interest and excitement about what's going on. As far as like locals directly impacted, some have spoken out in news stories, and there's some quotes there. But we're into year two here, and I think it's almost like a little bit of a broken record because it's kind of the same thing over and over.
Um,
But to your point, I wanted to say everything I'm doing, I'm trying to remain open and optimistic. I don't want to close the door because ultimately, I think they are here to stay, and so am I. And I want to work together and earnestly like welcome them as neighbors. And I've done that with the employees, and I've got good relationships with them, and I've been thanked by them for what I'm doing. So yeah, everything I'm doing, I'm trying to do out of grace and because I love my neighbor and that's how I was raised. But also, everything I say, I want to be able to defend in court. So I appreciate you being particular about what I said earlier because I do want to be careful with my words and be accurate. And that's how I've gained the trust is trying to share the facts and leave the hyperbole out.
okay. I wanted to ask you a separate question, which we haven't really covered. I think we know what the Boring Company is doing. They're building tunnel boring machines. SpaceX has got this property. I think they're planning on building Starlink satellites there. Do we know what they're doing on that property?
That's what I was told by an employee. Yeah.
Okay, and that would be probably the next generation Starlink satellites that are going to go on Starship. Have you heard of any other developments that might go in? We talked about the housing development that might go in. Are there any other rumors of other large land that's been bought that might have something else going up there, like more SpaceX work? I mean, Boring Company, I think it's pretty straightforward what they're doing. There's no like Tesla operations coming in or anything else that you're aware of, right?
I have not confirmed any of that. They do have that Hyperloop Plaza, which you may have seen. It's kind of like a restaurant area, but it has the Hyperloop name, so potentially a stop there, tunnel stop. I don't know.
Where is that?
Um, that's just north of where their big warehouse is, and I forget when you were here, but it's right there. It's the next one over.
On the east side of 1209 or the
Hmm.
west side? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So in theory, they could put a Boring Company tunnel start there to go into Austin or something like that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the property rights are going to be interesting, and from what I can tell, they're relatively untested. Their mineral rights are often separated out here and sold separately, and I think I've asked several people that I would thought would have known, but can someone put a tunnel under your land? I think it remains to be tested.
Okay. Um, I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
I I can't think of it. I was going to write notes. I was going to do some prep, so I didn't do any of my prep. But this was great. I felt like I got out what I wanted to say. Um, yeah, and I appreciate you pushing back. And if you want to do more of that, I'm happy to do more. That doesn't bother me at all. And I think you make good points.
Okay. Thank you, Chap. It's good talking to you. Everybody else,
We're,
please check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. Is there a website or something where they find you on Facebook? I know you're on X.
keepbastropboring.com.
Okay. I'll put a link to it in the video
Thanks.
description. Thank you, Chap.
Thank you, Warren.